A little while back, I started playing on an SMP, where I'm part of the Maze Kingdom. And everything is pretty great within the kingdom, except for the castle. That one is an eyesore. So today, we're giving it a makeover. The first thing I did was come up with the concept of what I wanted to take the place of the current castle, and I decided to run with an idea of a great throne room, which had a dark castle-like look. And since I had already designed the throne in a separate creative world, I decided to just start there. I wanted the throne to be really large and raised off the floor, and to accomplish that I made this podium which blends in with the throne to give it this really grand look. And at first, I had actually designed the throne with only green colors because the castle is in a hills biome, which means you can actually find emerald ore in the depths beneath the castle. And I thought that made for a decent story element of how this throne came to be as it is. But per request of the Maze King, I also added some red as a secondary accent color. And just to make the story element about the emerald ore even more clear, I added a top ornament featuring specifically the emerald block. On the back of the throne, I added these tentacle-looking swirly things to hold some lanterns and bring more of the red color into the build. A lot of my block choice was based on what I realistically would be able to get a hold of on the actual server, which is why I'm using blackstone instead of something like deep slate, which would have been more fitting to the narrative about the throne being built from materials collected deep underground. But since the server is running on 1.16, we do not have access to all the new 1.17 blocks. Lining the sides of the throne room, I had already marked out 6 places where I wanted some tall pillars, and I got to work on these as well. The design I went for was just mimicking that of the throne, and I even decided to carry the red and green combo over and integrated it within the pillars. Another thing I did, which I've never done before, was use the smoke from campfires to give the build sort of a more alive feeling by hiding campfires at the bottom of the pillars so only the smoke is visible, as if the smoke was seeping through the ground from some underground lava lakes deep within the mountain. To make my life a little bit easier, I just used the clone tool to copy and paste this exact pillar into all the places I wanted it. And if you're sitting out there being bummed that you don't know how to use World Edit, I can tell you now that I didn't use World Edit for this build at all. I simply utilized Minecraft's own built-in clone tool, which is of course not as powerful as World Edit, but it's very useful for simpler tasks such as copying a pillar. At this point, I was about as far with the build as I'd been in my concept world, and from here on out I was mostly just improvising, which is why you might also see me go back and forth a lot and redo some things. I did cut out most of the building process of things that didn't make it into the final build, and that might be why you will see some big jumps in progress a few times. Anyways, my throne room was really just a platform floating off the ground, so I did my best to connect it to the landscape below, and because I wanted to keep the build somewhat symmetrical, I ended up having quite an overhang off the mountain in the front of the building, but I didn't actually mind this as I just added some windows, and now this could function as an entrance hall into the bottom of the castle, which was just the original castle that was still in there. And although I don't think I show this at any point, I also end up adding a staircase behind the throne so that the building is actually functional without the players needing to fly. And you might have noticed that there was already a portal behind the throne in the previous clip, but it didn't quite have the dimension that I wanted, so I am redoing it here. And also this time I didn't light it right away because I kept going through it by accident, and that kept messing with my replay footage, so I waited to light it till I was almost done with the build. And around the portal I created this half tower, which is also where I end up building the staircase. I still hadn't decided on what type of detailing I wanted on the outer walls, so instead I just filled the inside wall of the half tower with blackstone and left the decision making for a future me. I find that sometimes having walls that are multiple blocks thick, even if it's just 2 blocks, especially on larger builds, can really be beneficial, both with creating depth, but also to add some contrast by layering lighter colors and darker colors. In this build I have the dark blackstone and the lighter stone bricks. Okay, in the next clip we jump quite far ahead in time, and I have started on the outer walls. I wanted the throne room to be really open, and even considered like not giving it a roof or walls at all, but in the end I settled on this ribcage inspired curved lower part where I left the top open for some kind of roof. And at first I wasn't really sure I liked this design, but the more I kept building, the more it grew on me, and when I finished the build, I was really happy that I'd stuck with this design but you'll have to stick around till the end to see that. Since I didn't really know what style or color of roof I wanted, I started on the little half tower, and at first I thought I would use some spruce because that was something I could find in the area around the castle, but honestly, it just looked ridiculously ugly, so I quickly changed it to dark prismarine, which both fit the color theme and the menacing look of the new castle far better. I used to think that the texture of dark prismarine just looked like some tacky old kitchen towels from the 60s or 70s, and I really didn't use it much, but then I think I saw someone use it as a roof block, and I remember thinking their build just looked so amazing, not just because of the roof, like in general it was just an overall epic build, and I do think that was what gave me sort of an open-mindedness towards the block that I didn't have before, and just see where that brought me now. Now I'm using it as a roof block, and I am loving the look of it. Then I moved to the main part of the building, and I decided that I probably wanted the center rectangle to extend up into a fake second floor. And on the ribs, or whatever you want to call those curved wall parts of the build, I also added some roofing because otherwise I thought that part looked kind of bare. And it also distributed the green color to more places on the build. Then I began designing the second floor. At first I was inspired by a sort of Greek temple look with columns lining the length of the room, but I will change that later. I think what made me change it was that when I got to the end and started designing the roof, I made it a really tall and curved A-frame, and also the fact that all these windows along the side made the wall really busy compared to the amount of detail that was on the rest of the build, so I didn't end up liking it, and I changed it to just a slightly simpler version of the same thing. Now, up until this point, I had only been using dark prismarine for the roof, and even though it had a lot of fun shapes and different curves, I still think it was too monochrome and boring, so I started adding a black trim around the roof and also over top the dome, which was just made from polished blackstone instead of the regular blackstone that I'd used everywhere else, just to change it up a little bit. Now, you see me for a second there work on a way to make this window at the end have some interesting shape, but I end up going back to one of my go-tos, which is just a stair in each corner and then some slabs in between just to round the corners off a little bit. Then I carry this same idea from downstairs and fill the inside wall with some blackstone to create that contrast that I was always looking for. And you know, contrast is an interesting thing because often I think of contrast as light versus dark, but really it's also about colors, desaturated and saturated. And that's probably why I also like big stone brick builds like this, to have some accent colors like green or red. And the last way I think of contrast is texture. And I'm not just talking about block texture, where you have something like smooth concrete against prismarine or crafting tables, but also texture on a larger scale, like you have many details put in a certain area. For example, if you add a bunch of buttons and trapdoors to a wall, it will suddenly have a lot more texture. But anyways, back to what we're actually seeing on screen. As you might have noticed, I have started building yet another tower on top of the roof. And don't ask me why I decided to do this, because there's no real function to this part of the build other than the looks, and I don't remember what I was thinking. Maybe I just wanted the roof to not look boring. Anyways, I was struggling a lot with figuring out how big I wanted this tower, and actually ended up using the fill command to get rid of it entirely and start over. Then I filled in the rest of the roof and added 2 additional smaller towers next to the big center one. Now, this is where I went back and decided that these walls were way too busy with the amount of windows that they had. And it also made the trim of the roof look ridiculously squiggly. So instead I opted for 2 smaller windows with more spacing in between on either end of the wall and 1 large window in the middle. Of course, I also kept with the theme of stairs in the corners and blackstone as an inner wall. Now, moving swiftly on to the bottom part of the building, I went back and filled in all the blackstone that I was missing, as well as extend the walls all the way to the terrain below. And I think this took the main part of the build from looking like a ribcage to looking more like a castle with large claw marks from some long gone dragon, or otherworldly beast. But you can decide for yourself which of these analogies you like more, or maybe you just think it looks like something entirely different. As we zoom through the window here on the top floor, you will see that I've started to cover all the walls with black stone and also filled the ceiling so you won't be able to stare all the way to the underside of the roof while visiting the king. Additionally, I also made the black stone from the outer walls extend into some neat arches that connect the two sides of the throne room, but also make for some nice, but fake looking, because gravity isn't a thing in Minecraft, support beams for the really over top roof that I've built so far. As a final touch, I added the iron bars as windows. Now, viewing from the bottom, you see me add a few layers of glass in the ceiling, and you might have seen this trick of layering glass in other builds to create a foggy effect, but I thought I'd use it here as a luminescent, but also pretty way of lighting the ceiling, and I do also think it adds an element of mystique to the throne room. I wasn't really sure what combination of glass colors I should use. I was trying red and black and red and pink, and you can see the different tiles up top, and I ended up just going with red and black in alternating layers, and I slapped a glowstone block on top to light it from above. But when you really see the effect is when I turn the game from day to night, and you can see just how great the light actually looks in the underside of the roof, and you can almost see how the carpet below mirrors into the red above, which ties the entire hall really nice together, I think. The three towers on top were still just gaping holes into the roof, so I began to finish them. I used a lot of the same elements from the pillars downstairs, like the red and the green, as well as having integrated campfires so only the smoke is visible. And since there's no way to access these towers, I decided to make them purely aesthetic, and with no other function than looking just epic. I went with having the red color in the middle tower and the green color in the two smaller towers, contrary to the pillars downstairs that all had both colors in an alternating pattern. The roofs I at first wanted to be domes, but I topped them off with a little flagpole, so they ended up being kinda pointy, which made them match the other roof, so that was actually perfectly fine. The tower in the middle was still not done, and I created another layer with black stone, and then layered the bottom part of the tower on top, making it symmetrical both horizontally and vertically. Now you might have noticed the floating stone brick there is off to the side, and if you haven't, now you definitely have. Well, that one is gonna stay there. I don't know how I missed it while I was building, but for some reason I just never broke it. And even in the final cinematic cut, it's still there, and I'm not gonna change it, so you'll have to live with it. Moving on, I wanted the half tower in back to have some cool designs and patterns on the outer layer of the wall, and as you can see, I'd already been trying some things out, but none of those I really liked. They were all just a bit too much pattern. It did take me quite a while before I came up with this design that I ended up liking, but I honestly like the trial and error method, as long as it's on a smaller scale, just like this one wall. The pattern that I ended up going with was using a combination of stone brick walls and stone brick slabs to make this pattern that you see, as well as my classic go-to window framing, where I just frame the window with a lot of blocks and put some stair blocks in the corners to round it off just a little bit. And just like with everything else in this build, the pattern is symmetrical on both sides, so that's really nice. In front, I wanted to somewhat mirror the tower from behind, but not completely, because I still wanted to keep the open air feeling of the throne room, where you would almost have to fly in to meet with the king. And this is where I came up with the idea of having just the roof and the parts of the wall that had windows, because just the roof would look kinda wonky and unsupported. Unfortunately, this does mean that we compromise the great view that the king would have had from his throne, but the render distance on the server is like 6 chunks, so he wouldn't be missing anything anyways. Sorry, King Maze, you can't have everything. In the one end of the throne room, we have the throne to light up the area, but in this end there wasn't really anything, so I added some hanging lanterns and extended the carpet, where I have glowstone underneath, to even out the lighting. Now I was basically finished with the build, and the last thing I did was light the portal behind the throne. And in a moment we should see the fly around of the build. Here it comes! And honestly, I am really proud of how this turned out. I have never built anything like this. The only other big builds like this I have ever created are the ones that are on my channel, and a few that I've created in a long-running survival world that I was playing during lockdown. But I feel there is so much more to this build, like the story and the thoughts I had of how such a throne castle would have come to be. And I also see now that I clearly subconsciously made some decisions in the build that reflect the character of the Maze King from our SMP. So if you're looking to create epic builds like this, I highly recommend having considered the backstory and the circumstance to get some inspiration flowing from the back of your mind. A dark shadow was cast over land. The rumbling innards of the mountain's flowing magma was seeping through the surface, and a misty fog drifted through the pillars of the castle. And the centerpiece of it all, the throne itself, was emanating with a whisper of the future and the story that lay ahead. So if you want to join me on this adventure, then I'll see you in the Maze Kingdom.